a man who gave up everything to raise his daughter alone, a CEO who never forgot the soldier who saved her life, and a single slap in a quiet cafe that cracked open 8 years of silence and changed all of them forever. If this is your first time here, hit that subscribe button right now and turn on notifications, because every week we bring you stories that will stop you mid-breath. Drop a like if you're already hooked, and tell us in the comments what city and country you're watching from. It genuinely moves us to see how far these stories travel. Now, settle in. This one runs deep. The morning had started the way most of Garrett Vance's mornings started, quietly, deliberately, with the kind of careful routine that only single fathers and former soldiers tend to build for themselves. He was up at 5:30 without an alarm. He'd stopped needing 1 year ago. His body simply knew when to come back from wherever sleep had taken it, and it always brought him back to the same small house on the east side of Austin, Texas, the same kitchen with the same warped cabinet door that he kept meaning to fix, and to the sound of his daughter Piper still asleep down the hall. Put the coffee on, stood at the kitchen window while the sky outside shifted from black to the color of old bruises, and let himself have 3 full minutes of nothing. That was the whole of his private time. 3 minutes. Then he heard the small footsteps. Daddy. Her voice was still thick with sleep. Morning, Pip. He didn't turn around. He pulled her mug from the cabinet, the one with the chipped handle shaped like a rabbit's ear, and poured her the warm milk she liked. Piper patted across the linoleum in her socks and pressed her face against the back of his arm the way she always did. Not hugging exactly, just making contact, the way a small animal checks that something familiar is still solid. Today the day, she asked. Today's the day. She lifted her head. 7 years old, and already possessing the ability to look at him with an expression that made him feel like he owed her an explanation for something. You're not going to be weird about it, are you? Weird how? Like you were at the science fair. You stood in the corner the whole time. I was watching. You looked like you were guarding something. He set her mug in front of her and finally turned around. She had her mother's eyes dark brown with a ring of amber near the center, the kind of eyes that collected light. He'd spent the first year after losing Claire unable to look directly at Piper for more than a few seconds without his chest going sideways. He was better now. Mostly. I'll stand wherever you want me to stand, he said. Piper considered this seriously. Near the painting. But not too near. And don't cross your arms. I cross my arms when I'm cold. You cross your arms when you're being intimidating, and you don't know it. He stared at her. She stared back and drank her warm milk. Garrett Vance was 37 years old and worked out of a converted garage on the east side of town, repairing marine engines boats, mostly, which was an odd specialty for a landlocked city. But Austin had its lakes and its wealthy people with toys they didn't know how to maintain. And Garrett was methodical and reasonably priced and never made his clients feel stupid for what they didn't know. That was the whole of his professional reputation, and it suited him. To the neighborhood, he was simply the quiet one. The man who waved from the driveway but never lingered. The one who showed up to school functions alone and left promptly. His neighbor, an older woman named Dolores, had tried 3 times to set him up with her niece, and he declined each time so gently that Dolores bore him no grudge over it. There was nothing unfriendly about Garrett Vance. He just seemed like a man who had decided, at some point, that a smaller life was a safer one, and had arranged himself accordingly. The scar was the only thing people occasionally asked about. It ran from just beneath his left ear in a curved line toward his collarbone, not long enough to be disfiguring, not faded enough to be old history. When asked, Garrett said he'd been in an accident years back. People usually accepted that. The ones who looked more carefully sometimes seemed like they wanted to press further, but something in his expression, not a warning exactly, more like a closed door with no handle, made them think better of it. He never explained it. He never explained much of anything, and Austin was the kind of city that didn't require you to. Piper's school art exhibition began at 11. Garrett told her they'd leave at 9:15 to allow for traffic, because he'd built in an extra 45 minutes of buffer that he didn't mention to her. She had asked, the night before, if they could stop at a café first. A real one, not the drive-through. She wanted to sit down like people do on Saturday mornings. She'd said it with a formality that had made him smile when she wasn't looking. He said yes. He'd already looked one up. Café Linwood was on South Congress. Upscale in the casual Austin way, exposed brick, handwritten menus on a chalkboard, the kind of place where the coffee cost $4.50 and nobody apologized for it. He'd have preferred a diner. He chose this one because Piper had once pointed at it from the car window and said it looked like a place where important things happened. She was wearing her good dress navy blue with small white dots, the one she'd picked herself, and she'd brushed her hair without being asked, which almost never happened. She walked beside him with the focused seriousness of someone about to do something significant. They found a table near the window. A server came quickly. Piper ordered a hot chocolate and a croissant and then looked to him for approval, and he gave a small nod. He ordered black coffee and nothing else. The place was maybe half full. A couple with a laptop near the door, a group of older women at a round table toward the back, and at the table immediately beside theirs, close enough that the chairs almost touched, a woman was working. She didn't look up when they sat. She had a leather-bound portfolio spread across the table and a laptop open beside it, and her focus had the compressed quality of someone who had exactly as much time as the task required, and not a second more. Late 20s, maybe 30. Dark hair pulled back efficiently. She was dressed well, but without performance-quality clothes, worn by someone who didn't think about them much. Security badge on a lanyard hung from the back of her chair. Across from her sat a man who was watching the room. Garrett noticed him immediately, the way he noticed anyone who watched rooms for a living, because professionals recognize the posture, weight forward, shoulders slightly out, eyes that didn't settle anywhere long enough to actually look at anything. He was maybe 45, thick in the neck, wearing a blazer that didn't quite contain him. There was a communications earpiece tucked behind his right ear. Private security, corporate, not government. The woman he was sitting with was his principal. Garrett filed it and moved on. Piper was telling him about the painting she'd submitted, a landscape, she said, though she corrected herself and called it a seascape, because the water was the whole point, and he watched her hands move as she talked. The way she always talked with her hands, and thought that she must have gotten that from Claire too, because he'd never been able to. Hot chocolate arrived. Piper reached for it with both hands, turning to say something to him as she did, and her elbow caught the edge of the table beside them. The leather portfolio slid. A coffee cup went with it. The sound of its ceramic hitting the table's edge, liquid spreading fast, happened in about a second and a half. Garrett was already moving, his hand out, but he caught the portfolio and not the cup. Coffee spread across the document inside. The woman with the laptop looked down at it with an expression that was more controlled than the situation probably warranted, which told him she was someone who'd trained herself not to react visibly. Piper had gone completely still. "I'm so sorry," she said, in the small voice she used when she knew she'd done something she couldn't undo. "I didn't mean—" "It's fine," the woman said. She was already lifting the portfolio, assessing the damage. Her voice was even not warm exactly, but not cold either. Just occupied elsewhere. Garrett was already reaching for a stack of napkins from the dispenser at the edge of their table. "Here," he said. That was the moment the man in the blazer stood up. He was faster than his size suggested, which meant he was used to moving quickly. He didn't go for the spill. He came directly around the table toward Garrett, not toward Piper. Garrett noticed, not toward the mess, and put a hand on Garrett's shoulder, with the full weight of someone who was accustomed to that gesture, landing a certain way. "You two need to take this somewhere else," he said. His voice was quiet but not soft, the kind of quiet that was meant to be felt more than heard. Garrett looked at the hand on his shoulder, then he reached up and removed it. Not quickly, not aggressively, with the unhurried precision of someone who had decided the hand was no longer going to be there. The man Travis, though Garrett didn't know his name yet, went very still. "My daughter knocked over a cup by accident," Garrett said. "We were just getting napkins." Travis's jaw moved. Something shifted in his face, the particular recalibration of a man whose authority has been quietly, publicly, and entirely calmly refused. "I said, I heard you," Garrett said. The woman looked up from the folder. Travis's hand came up and struck Garrett across the left side of his face. It wasn't a closed fist. It was open-palmed, fast, the kind of slap designed to humiliate rather than injure. It landed squarely, and the sound of it crossed the whole cafe. Everything stopped. The couple near the door looked up. The women at the back table went silent. The server behind the counter went completely still with a cloth in her hand. Piper made a sound that Garrett would think about later. Alone, in the kitchen, after she was asleep, a short, sharp cry. The sound of a child who has never watched an adult put hands on her father and doesn't have any framework for it. Garrett didn't fall back. He didn't grab the table. He absorbed the impact with the same stillness with which he had removed the hand from his shoulder, and then, without raising his voice and without moving toward Travis, he said one word. Back. Piper moved. She knew that voice. She pressed herself behind him so quickly it looked practiced, and Garrett put his arm back and kept her there without looking. Then he looked at Travis. He didn't say anything else. He just looked, with the kind of attention that had no heat in it at all, no anger, no shock, no impulse. Just assessment. The silence that came off him was the specific silence of someone who has decided, completely and without drama, exactly how much of themselves they are willing to use, and has concluded it's nowhere near what they're capable of. Travis had hit men before, Garrett could see it in the posture. But he had never hit anyone who looked back at him like that. The woman had risen to her feet. Travis. Her voice was different now. Not occupied. Present. But she wasn't looking at Travis. Impact had shifted Garrett's collar. Just slightly. Enough. And the scar, the curved pale line that ran from beneath his left ear toward his collarbone, was visible above the neckline of his shirt. She was staring at it. The color left her face in a way that had nothing to do with the situation in the cafe. This was older than that. This was something that had been living in a room inside her for years, and had just, without warning, opened its door. Her lips parted. For a moment she didn't speak. Then quietly, in a voice that barely cleared the distance between them, she said, "Where did you get that scar?" Piper, still behind her father's arm, peeked around at the woman who had just asked the strangest question anyone had ever asked in the middle of what was already the strangest morning of her life. Garrett's expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes did. He knew the question, not the words, the weight of them. He knew what the question meant and where it came from and how long it had been waiting. He'd lived his whole adult life inside the careful distance between his past and the present, and in 5 years in Austin, he'd gotten very good at keeping that distance intact. He said nothing, which was its own kind of answer. The woman took one slow step toward him, her eyes still fixed on the scar, and something in her expression shifted from shock into something more complicated recognition, threaded through with disbelief, and beneath that, carefully maintained for what looked like a very long time, something that might once have been gratitude and had spent years with nowhere to go. "I've seen that scar before," she said. And in the middle of the silent cafe, with his daughter pressed against his back and a red mark rising on his left cheek, Garrett Vance looked at Maren Whitlock for the first time in 8 years and said absolutely nothing at all. Question hung in the air between them like something that had been dropped from a great height and hadn't finished falling yet. Garrett didn't answer. He didn't move. He stood with Piper pressed against his back, and the red outline of Travis's hand still rising on his cheek, and he looked at Maren Whitlock with the careful, measuring quiet of a man who has spent years deciding what to let through and what to hold at the door. Around them, the cafe hadn't fully come back to life yet. The couple near the entrance had stopped pretending to look at their laptop. The server behind the counter still had the cloth in her hand and wasn't doing anything with it. The older women at the back table were exchanging glances with the particular energy of people who have witnessed something they're going to describe in detail to someone else before the day is out. Travis was still standing. He hadn't moved since the slap, which told Garrett something the man was waiting to see how the situation settled before he decided what version of himself to be next. That was a certain kind of person. Garrett had known a lot of them. Maren took another step forward. Not aggressive. Careful. The way you move towards something you're not sure is real. "I need to ask you again," she said. "That scar, where did you get it?" "That's not really a cafe conversation," Garrett said. "I know." She didn't apologize for pushing. "I'm asking anyway." Piper had relaxed enough to come out from fully behind him. She was standing at his side now, holding the fabric of his sleeve with 2 fingers not gripping, just maintaining contact and watching Maren with the frank, unfiltered evaluation of a 7-year-old who hasn't yet learned to disguise what she's thinking. Garrett looked down at his daughter, then back at Maren. Something in the woman's face stopped him from giving his usual answer. The accident story lived on the tip of his tongue the way it always did, smooth from years of use, and he almost said it. But Maren Whitlock was looking at him with an expression that wasn't curiosity. It was older than that, more specific. The kind of look that told him she wasn't asking because she wanted to know. She was asking because she already did. "Piper," he said, without looking away from Maren. "Go sit back at our table. But Dad, hot chocolate's getting cold." She went, reluctantly, pulling herself up onto her chair with the exaggerated dignity of someone making a point about how cooperative they're choosing to be. Garrett turned back to Maren. 8 years ago," she said, before he could speak. Her voice had dropped. Not a whisper, but close. "Northern Mali. A civilian aviation team. Communications went down during a fuel survey operation, and the convoy got boxed in on a road outside a town called Tesselit." She watched his face. Nothing moved in it. She kept going. "There was a Navy SEAL extraction team. They came in without any announcement, no advance contact, no radio coordination we could hear. They just appeared at the front of the convoy like they'd come up out of the ground. Their team leader had a calm voice. He didn't raise it once, not even when the second vehicle's axle gave out, and we lost 20 minutes we didn't have." She paused. "There were 11 civilians. There was room for 10 on the helicopter." The server had slowly, quietly, retreated to the far end of the counter. "The team leader gave his seat to a man named Darren Holt," Maren continued. "Darren had a compound fracture in his right leg from when the vehicle went off the road. He needed to go first. The team leader knew that. He stepped back, put Darren in his place, and said he'd take the secondary extraction." She looked at the scar. "The rope line caught him on the way up during the follow extraction. Right side of his neck, running down toward the collarbone. It happened fast. He didn't make a sound. Garrett says nothing. I never learned his name," Maren said. "The whole operation was clean in that way, where they clearly didn't want names attached to anything. By the time we were debriefed, the team had already been pulled. I asked 3 times through official channels and got exactly nowhere." She lifted her eyes from the scar to his face. "I stopped asking eventually. I just kept carrying it. Somewhere in the café, a chair scraped softly against the floor. "You were 22, Garrett said. His voice was flat, not unkind. Maren blinked. 22. Yes. You were in the second vehicle when it rolled. Beat. Third. He almost corrected himself, then didn't. Close enough. He'd been working from the dark end of a bad situation, and there had been 11 people in various states of panic, and he had committed their positions to memory the way he'd been trained to, but 8 years put a layer of gauze over the specifics. You had a red jacket, he said. You were the only one who didn't lose it during the first scramble. You kept it on the whole time. Maren stared at him. It was for visibility, she said very quietly. I'd read that you should in an emergency. Something bright. It was a good instinct. She made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. Her eyes had gone bright in the way that happens before someone decides, firmly, not to cry in a cafe. Travis took a step forward. Maren. His voice was careful now, a different register than the one he'd been using 5 minutes ago, when he thought he was in control of the room. You don't know that this is the same Travis. He could have read about. He knew about the red jacket, she said. That wasn't in any report. Travis's jaw worked. He looked at Garrett with an expression that had moved past aggression into something more uncomfortable. The particular resentment of a man who has just struck someone and is beginning to understand, in real time, exactly how badly he has miscalculated. Garrett hadn't looked at Travis since the slap. He did now, briefly, with the disinterested assessment of someone cataloging a problem and deciding how large it actually is. Then he looked back at Maren. It was a long time ago, he said. I know it was. I didn't give up the seat for recognition. I know that too. She steadied herself. There was a quality to the way she held herself that reminded him of people who'd been in the field, not military, but the kind of civilian professionals who'd worked in volatile places and learned to manage adrenaline because the alternative was paralysis. She'd built something since Tesselit. He could see it in the way she stood. But I've spent 8 years not being able to thank you, and you're standing in front of me right now. So, you don't need to thank me. No, she agreed, but I need you to let me. Piper, from her table, had given up all pretense of drinking her hot chocolate and was watching them openly with her chin resting in both hands. Garrett said, after a moment, we're even. Maren's expression shifted. That's not how it works. It's how I'm choosing to count it. She seemed like she wanted to argue with that. She also seemed like she recognized, from whatever she'd learned in the years between then and now, that some people cannot be pushed and that pushing them just makes the distance between you larger. She let it go, not completely, not with any indication that she was done with the conversation, but enough. She extended her hand. Maren Whitlock, she said, as if they were starting over, as if the spilled coffee and the slap and 8 years of silence could be acknowledged and then set aside in favor of something more workable. He looked at her hand for a moment. Then he shook it. Garrett Vance, I know, she said. And then, at his expression, you had a name tape on your gear. In Tessellate, just the last name. I saw it when you lifted Darren into the helicopter. He hadn't known that. He absorbed it without showing anything. The marine engine repair, she said. That's what you do now. That's what I do now. Her eyes went to Piper, who immediately looked down at her mug with unconvincing innocence. Your daughter, Maren said. Not a question, Piper, he said. She's 7. She has an art exhibition in. He checked his watch, 2 hours and 14 minutes, and I told her we'd be there with time to sit and look at the other kids' work first, which is what she wanted. Something softened at the corners of Maren's mouth. Then we shouldn't keep you. No. He reached back for his jacket on the chair. You probably want to deal with the presentation folder. She glanced at it, still wet at the edges, the top document visibly damaged. Her face did the controlled thing again, filing the problem under manageable. It's recoverable. I have copies. He nodded once and started to turn. Mr. Vance, he stopped. The fact that you're here, she said. In Austin, living the way you're living. A pause that's carried real weight. I think that's a harder thing than what you did in Tessellate. He didn't respond to that. He picked up Piper's coat from the back of her chair and held it out to his daughter, who climbed down from her seat with all the unsuppressed curiosity of someone who wanted very badly to ask at least 15 questions and was exercising monumental self-control. Travis moved then. He stepped toward Garrett, and the movement was different from before, not aggressive, or at least not performing aggression. There was something around his eyes that might have been the early stage of embarrassment, which, on a man like Travis, showed up, looking almost like anger. I'll give you my information, Travis said. His voice was clipped. Not an apology, not yet. He seemed to search for a word. For what happened? What happened, Garrett said evenly, was you put your hand on me and then hit me in front of my daughter. Travis's nostrils flared. I know, he said, through something that cost him. Then say that, a long beat. The cafe had gone very quiet again. I put my hand on you, Travis said slowly, and I struck you in front of your daughter. That was wrong. Garrett looked at him for a moment, assessing whether that was the whole truth or the performance of it. He'd gotten good at the difference over the years, and the truth was he couldn't fully tell with Travis. The man was complicated in the way that security professionals often were genuinely capable, genuinely proud, and genuinely accustomed to getting away with things because they worked adjacent to power. Okay, Garrett said, not forgiven, not forgotten. Just received. He turned to go. They almost made it. A voice came from the back of the cafe, from the direction of the older women's table. Not one of the women. A man who'd been sitting alone at a two-top near the hallway that led to the restrooms. A man Garrett hadn't cataloged as significant because he was unremarkable late 50s, gray at the temples, reading a newspaper. The kind of person whose stillness didn't register as anything other than ordinary. Chief Petty Officer Vance. The name came out with the particular precision of someone who had used military titles long enough that they became reflex. Garrett stopped. He turned his head. The man was already getting to his feet. He was lean in the way of people who stayed active without making a project of it. He had a careful, deliberate way of moving. He was looking at Garrett with an expression that Garrett recognized the expression of someone calculating how a reunion lands before committing to it. Garrett had last seen that face in a medical tent in West Africa, above a pair of blue latex gloves, under fluorescent lights that buzzed on a faulty circuit. Doc Reyes, Hospital Corpsman First Class Miguel Reyes, retired, who had kept 3 men alive on a hilltop outside Agadez with limited supplies, improvised equipment, and the specific, quiet stubbornness of someone who refused to let arithmetic tell him what was possible. Miguel, Garrett said. Garrett. The man's voice was warm but contained. He stopped a few feet away, hands in his jacket pockets, not rushing forward for any kind of embrace. He knew better. Been a while. About 6 years. 6 and change. Miguel glanced at Piper, who was staring at him with unguarded fascination. He gave her a small nod, the kind adults give children when they want to acknowledge them without patronizing them. Then he looked at the mark on Garrett's face, and something moved through his expression quickly, professionally suppressed. Just walked in, Miguel said, was sitting in the back. Didn't want to interrupt anything before I understood what was happening. And now you understand it? Enough of it. Travis had straightened up. His attention had sharpened. You know this man? Miguel looked at Travis for a moment in the way of someone deciding how much information a person is entitled to. I do, he said. From where? From work, Miguel said simply. Travis turned to Garrett. Something was shifting in him, visibly the sequence of information arriving in an order his assumptions hadn't accounted for. Quiet single father with a scarred neck who removed a security professional's hand from his shoulder without blinking. A CEO who recognized him from a classified extraction 8 years ago. And now a stranger from the back of a café who called him by a military title and looked at the mark on his face with the practiced calm of a man who had spent years seeing worse. What exactly did you do? Travis said. Not a question, quite. Garrett didn't answer. Miguel cleared his throat. It wasn't subtle. He was the team leader of SEAL Team 8's direct action element for 4 years running. 2 combat deployments before that with the East Coast teams. He held the highest marksmanship qualification in his unit 3 consecutive cycles. He paused. He also stayed behind with 4 wounded operators in Sector 7 of the Agadez operation while the rest of the unit cleared out, and he kept them all in place for 9 hours until secondary extraction came through. He said it the way you describe something that happened, no performance, no emphasis. Just the facts arranged in order, Miguel, Garrett said. I know. Miguel looked at him steadily. But this one needs to know. This one, Travis said, his voice lower now, is standing right here. I can see that, Miguel said, without adjusting his tone at all. Piper had come to stand very close to Garrett's side. She was looking at Miguel with her mother's eyes and that particular expression that meant she was absorbing everything and would have follow-up questions for the rest of the calendar year. Garrett put his hand on her shoulder. Dad, she said quietly. Yeah. Is this one of those things you're going to explain later? When you're older, he said. You always say that, because it's always true. Maren had gone still in the way of someone putting together a picture one piece at a time. She was watching Garrett with an expression he didn't entirely have a category for, not pity, not admiration, something more complicated. The specific look of a person revising, in real time, the story they thought they already knew. The operation in Agadez, she said carefully. Was that after Molly? 3 months after, Miguel said. She looked at Garrett. He said nothing. You stayed behind with 4 wounded men, she said. It came out like she was reading it off a wall somewhere. It was the job, Garrett said. For 9 hours. The timeline isn't the point. What is the point? He looked at her steadily. The point is that it was a long time ago, and I'm not that person anymore. I'm a dad who fixes boat engines, and I was trying to have coffee with my daughter before her art show. And all of this, he gestured, brief and controlled, at the general situation, is not how I intended the morning to go. The silence that followed had a texture to it not awkward, but weighted. The kind that settles when too much real information has entered a space too quickly, and everyone present is sorting through it at different speeds. It was Travis who broke it. He pulled his blazer straight, a habitual gesture, something to do with his hands, and looked at Maren. We should get the presentation sorted, he said. The Mercer meeting is in 4 hours. Maren didn't look at him. Travis, she said. We can handle Travis. She said it differently the second time. Flat and final. Sit down. Travis looked at her. A beat passed in which the particular machinery of their professional relationship adjusted itself audibly to a new calibration. He sat down. Maren turned back to Garrett. She seemed to be deciding something. With a person like her and Garrett had met enough of them to recognize the type, the ones who built things from ideas and will, and managed to make other people believe in what they were building, deciding, looked like stillness. She got very quiet right before she committed to something. I owe you a coffee, she said, at minimum. You don't. I'm aware I don't. I want to. She held his gaze. And I want to apologize properly for what happened this morning. What Travis did. He already said his piece. He said words, she said. That's not the same thing, and you know it. She glanced toward Piper. Your daughter shouldn't have seen that. No, Garrett agreed. She shouldn't have. The honesty of that undecorated, not minimized, seemed to land differently than the careful language that had been circulating the room. Maren held it for a moment. The exhibition starts at 11, she said. 11? Yes. The Mercer meeting is at 2. She said it as though she were thinking aloud, doing the math of her own day against the shape of this unexpected morning. I'll be at Linwood until 10:30 at least. There's a draft security annex in that folder that needs to be reconstructed. She looked at him. I'm not going to pretend I don't have more I want to say to you. But I also won't hold you here when your daughter has somewhere to be. He looked at her for a moment. Then he did something that surprised him slightly. He reached into his jacket pocket and came out with a plain white business card. His name, a phone number, the word Vance Marine in small print at the bottom. He held it out. She took it carefully. Mr. Vance, she said. Just Garrett. She nodded once, the smallest acknowledgement. Piper, sensing a shift in temperature, pulled gently on her father's sleeve. Dad, we're going to be late. We have time. We have exactly enough time, she said, which was a distinction she considered important. He almost smiled. He didn't. Quite. He put his hand on the top of her head briefly, one of those gestures that has no name but carries everything, and looked back at Maren. Miguel was still standing nearby. He'd put himself slightly out of the direct line of conversation, the instinct of a man who knows when he's said his part and when the rest belongs to other people. Caught Garrett's eye. Coffee sometime, Miguel said. No crowd. Sure, Garrett said. No crowds. It was between them, an acknowledgement and an apology and a kind of contract, all in 6 words. They had the shorthand of people who'd operated in confined spaces under difficult circumstances, and it meant, I didn't do that to expose you. I did it because it needed doing. And I know. We're still okay. Garrett moved toward the door. Piper walked beside him, close, the way she always walked close in unfamiliar situations. At the door, she turned back once and looked at Maren with her direct, uncomplicated stare. Maren looked back. Piper gave a small, serious nod as if she'd concluded something. Then they were through the door, out onto the sidewalk in the mild Saturday morning, and the sounds of South Congress settled around them. Traffic, birdsong from somewhere, a distant radio. Piper slipped her hand into his. That woman knows you from before, she said. Not a question. From a long time ago, she looked at you like... She searched for the words with the effortful concentration of someone who knows what they mean, but not yet how to say it. Like she was looking at something she'd been trying to find. Garrett walked. He didn't answer immediately. Sometimes, he said eventually, you lose track of a thing. And then you find it again somewhere unexpected. And the finding of it is he paused. It's a lot when it happens. Piper thought about this for half a block. Was she nice? She asked. The woman? He considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. I think she was trying to be, he said, which is maybe all any of us can do on a Saturday morning. Piper seemed to find this acceptable. She gripped his hand a little tighter, and they walked the 2 blocks to where the truck was parked, and she climbed into the passenger seat with her navy blue dress and her serious face and all her questions that she was saving for later, and Garrett pulled out into traffic with the red mark on his cheek already fading, and the business card in Maren Whitlock's hand, and the morning rearranged into something he hadn't planned for and couldn't quite name yet. Behind him in Café Linwood, Travis Rourke sat across from his employer and said nothing. And Maren Whitlock turned the plain white card over once in her fingers before setting it carefully at the dry edge of the ruined presentation folder, where it wouldn't get wet, and going back to work. The art exhibition was held in the school gymnasium, which the teachers had transformed with the kind of dedicated effort that makes you feel bad for noticing the limitations. Paper lanterns hung from the basketball hoops. Folding tables had been covered with white tablecloths and arranged in a horseshoe. Student work lined the walls, watercolors, charcoal sketches, one ambitious collage made entirely from magazine pages, and the whole room smelled like the particular combination of tempera paint and industrial floor cleaner that Garrett associated now with the specific texture of his Austin life. The ordinary version, the one he'd chosen. Piper had stopped talking about the cafe by the time they parked. She had a talent for compartmentalization that he suspected she'd developed on her own, without any instruction from him, simply because she'd spent her whole conscious life watching her father do it. By the time they walked through the gymnasium doors, she was present in the way that children can be when something matters to them, vibrating slightly, scanning the room, calculating where her piece was hanging before she'd taken 3 steps inside. "There," she said, and pointed. Her painting was on the far wall, between a landscape watercolor and a drawing of a horse. It was larger than he'd realized. She'd worked on it at school over 3 weeks, and it was a seascape, as advertised, done in acrylics, that she'd mixed herself from the classroom supply set. The water was in layers, dark at the bottom, lighter toward the horizon, with a pale strip at the top that might have been sky, or might have been something she hadn't fully decided on yet. There were 3 figures on the shore, small and somewhat indistinct, rendered with the honest imprecision of a child who knows what she means, but whose hand isn't all the way caught up yet. He stood in front of it for a long moment. "What do you think?" Piper asked, trying to sound casual. She was not succeeding. "I think it's the best thing in this room," he said. "You're my dad. You have to say that." "I don't have to say anything," he said. "I'm saying it because it's true." She looked at the painting, and then at him, and then at the painting again. And her expression did the complicated thing. It sometimes did the thing where she was measuring what she felt against what was appropriate to show, and then she seemed to decide that this particular moment was allowed to be good without any qualification, and she stood a little straighter. They stayed for nearly 2 hours. He met her teacher, a patient woman named Mrs. Okafor, who told him that Piper had repainted the water 3 times until it looked the way she wanted it to. He shook hands with other parents, whose names he immediately lost. He stood near the painting, not too near, and without crossing his arms, and watched his daughter move through the room with the confidence of someone in her own territory. It was a good morning, despite everything that had preceded it. He didn't let himself think about Maren Whitlock until they were back in the truck. The thought of her came back in pieces during the drive home. The way the color had left her face. The particular quality of her voice when she'd asked about the scar, not demanding, not performative, just real in the way that things are real when they've been carried a long time. Card in her hand. He'd given her the card without planning to, and he wasn't entirely sure what that meant. And he was 45 minutes into the drive home before he admitted to himself that he did know, actually, and just didn't want to examine it yet. Piper fell asleep in the passenger seat before they left the parking lot. She slept with her chin dropped toward her chest, and her hands folded in her lap, and he drove without the radio and let the highway come at him in the afternoon light. He thought about Miguel. Miguel Reyes had been the best medic Garrett had ever worked with, in a career that had exposed him to a significant sample size. The man operated with a steadiness that had nothing to do with not caring. He cared intensely, always, about the specific person in front of him, and everything to do with having made a decision. Somewhere along the way, that panic was a luxury he couldn't afford on behalf of other people. He'd retired 2 years before Garrett did, left the teams quietly, and Garrett had lost track of him in the ordinary way that men like them lost track of each other, not from indifference, but from the sheer gravitational weight of getting through their own days. Seeing him in the café had been a thing Garrett was still integrating. He'd meant what he said to Miguel with a look, "I know you had your reasons," but he also felt the edges of something he hadn't wanted felt in public, which was the particular discomfort of having yourself described accurately by someone else in front of strangers without your consent. Miguel hadn't been wrong about a single word. That was almost the problem. He got home, carried a still sleeping Piper inside, put her on the couch with her shoes off and a blanket over her legs, and went to the kitchen to make a sandwich. He stood at the counter and ate it without tasting it, and then washed the plate. His phone was on the counter. He looked at it. He did not expect Maren Whitlock to call within 2 days. He expected, if he was being realistic, that the full weight of her day, the Mercer meeting, the damaged presentation, the business of running a growing aerospace company would absorb the morning at Café Linwood back into the general noise of her week within 48 hours. People had flashes of real feeling all the time. That didn't mean the feeling survived contact with a full calendar. He was wrong about the 48 hours. She called the following evening at 7:15. Piper was doing homework at the kitchen table, complaining with some seriousness about long division. Garrett stepped into the hallway. "This is unexpected," he said.
I know.
No preamble, no apology for the hour. He respected that. "I wanted to check that you were all right, and I wanted to ask if I could take you to dinner. Not to continue the conversation we had, specifically. Just dinner, if you're willing." He leaned against the hallway wall. Through the kitchen door, he could hear Piper make a sound of concentrated frustration at her worksheet. "I don't have reliable childcare on short notice," he said. "I'm not suggesting short notice. I'm suggesting whenever works for you." "Why?" A brief silence. "Because you're someone I feel like I should know," she said. "And I've felt that way for 8 years. And you're standing in my city, which seems like information I should do something with." He thought about that. "Saturday," he said. "If my neighbor can take Piper for the evening, Saturday works. Nothing complicated," he said. "I'm not good at complicated restaurants." "Neither am I," she said, which he suspected might be partially untrue but appreciated the effort of. "I'll send you a place," he said. He heard her exhale, not with relief exactly. More like the sound of something that's been held, tensely releasing a small amount of pressure. "Thank you, Garrett," she said. He returned to the kitchen. Piper looked up from her long division. Who was that? Someone from this morning. The woman. Not a question. Yes. Piper looked at him with the evaluating expression she'd inherited from no one he could identify, because Claire had not had it, and he certainly didn't have it when directed at himself. "Is she nice?" she asked again. The same question as before, but she was asking it differently now. Measuring something. "I'm starting to think so," he said. Piper returned to her worksheet. "Okay," she said, which covered a great deal of ground. They had dinner that Saturday at a barbecue place on the east side, the kind of restaurant with paper towel rolls on the table instead of napkins, where the meat was listed on a chalkboard, and the lines were long but moved steadily. Maren arrived in dark jeans and a plain jacket, her hair down, and looked slightly startled by the line stretching out the door, and then adjusted within about 10 seconds into someone who found this entirely acceptable. He noted the adjustment. It told him something. They talked for 3 hours. Not about Tessellate, not about what he'd done or what she'd built since. They talked about Austin, which she'd moved to 4 years ago for the aerospace corridor. About Piper, whom he described with the particular careful pride of a parent trying not to make their child the whole of their personality, but failing slightly. About what it was like to run a company through the growth phase, which she described with the dryness of someone who'd survived it and could now see its absurdities clearly. She talked about the Mercer meeting the government contract presentation that Travis had accompanied her to that Saturday. She mentioned it sideways, and Garrett let her, and then she said, "We got the contract, by the way." Despite the folder situation. "Good," he said. "Travis submitted his resignation Monday," she said. "I'm still deciding whether to accept it." Garrett looked at her. "That's your decision." "I know it is. That's why I'm not asking for your opinion." She met his eyes. "I'm just telling you." He liked that. He liked that she knew the difference. The evening ended with them standing on the sidewalk outside, and she said she'd like to do this again, and he said he would too, and neither of them made a production of it. He drove home. He sat in the truck in the driveway for a few minutes before going inside. He wasn't sure what he was doing exactly. That was an unusual feeling for him. He was good at knowing what he was doing. He'd built his whole post-service life on the clarity of intent: know the mission, know the terrain, know the risks, move accordingly. Maren Whitlock didn't fit cleanly into any category he'd prepared, and he wasn't sure yet whether that was a problem or just information. He went inside. He checked on Piper. She was asleep with a library book open on her chest, which was normal. He went to bed. He didn't sleep well, which was also normal, but for different reasons than usual. What wasn't normal was what happened 11 days later. He was in the garage, midway through pulling a carburetor from a twin-engine inboard that had come in from Lake Travis, when his phone buzzed on the workbench. He wiped his hands and looked at it. Maren's number. Not a call, a text. "Something's wrong with my security setup. I don't mean the staffing. Can I come to you?" He read it twice. He looked at the phrasing. Not "can we talk," not "can I call." "Can I come to you?" That was specific. He typed back, "Send me the address you're at right now." She sent it. A building on the north side Whitlock Aerospace Austin office, a 4-story converted industrial complex off Burnett Road. He was in his truck in 6 minutes. She met him in the parking structure on the second level. She looked like she hadn't slept the night before, which he could recognize by now as a specific departure from her baseline. She was holding a tablet and a manila folder, and she had the compressed energy of someone who'd been running through the same scenario in their head for hours trying to find an exit they kept missing. "I need you to look at something," she said, "and tell me if I'm reading it correctly, because if I'm right then, I've had a serious problem for longer than I want to think about." He took the tablet. On it was a security access log, the kind that tracked entry and exit times for restricted areas, cross-referenced with personnel ID numbers. She'd highlighted 3 entries in red. Travis had clearance for the document archive on level 3, she said, standard for his position. "I didn't look closely at the access logs until Monday, when I started going through his clearance revocation. He'd been accessing the archive at off hours." She paused. 14 times in 8 weeks. Garrett scrolled through the log. Was he supposed to? Not 14 times. Not at 11:30 p.m. She opened the manila folder. Pulled the camera footage from level 3 for 6 of those dates. "Here." She handed him a series of still frames printed on office paper. The image quality was institutional flat lighting, wide angle, timestamp in the corner. In each frame, the same figure in the same corridor. Each time, he was holding something. In 2 of the frames, it was visible enough to identify a flat rectangular device, approximately the size of a thin novel. Garrett had seen devices like that before. The specific memory wasn't from any civilian context. "That's a portable data extractor," he said. Maren nodded. "I had my IT director confirm it this morning. It's not commercially available. Or it's available in the sense that specific people know how to acquire it." She looked at him steadily. He was pulling documents from our classified development files. Propulsion system schematics, the government contract annex, security protocol for our upcoming DoD presentation. Garrett set the printouts down on the hood of a nearby car. "How long have you known?" "Since this morning. I've been in the building since 6 a.m. going through everything I could pull." She rubbed her face with one hand, a gesture that cracked the composure briefly, let the exhaustion through. "The Mercer presentation is in 3 weeks. If someone has the security annex, they can walk your DoD reviewers through your own vulnerabilities before you get to demonstrate them as resolved," he said.
"Yes. Who's the rival?"
She said a name, Harlan Voss, founder of a defense tech firm called Corridon Systems. She said it with the restrained fury of someone who had spent years competing against a person who didn't compete cleanly and couldn't prove it until now. Garrett looked at the access logs again. "The Saturday in the café," he said. Travis had a phone on the table. Maren looked at him. "He photographed the presentation folder," Garrett said, "before the coffee spill. I saw him do it. I didn't know what I was seeing at the time. I clocked the motion, filed it, didn't attach significance because I wasn't looking for it." He set the tablet down. The slap was a distraction. If I'm making a scene of the confrontation, neither of us is looking at what's on the table. Maren was very still. "He staged it," she said. "I don't know if he staged Piper bumping the table. But he escalated on purpose. He knew the folder was open. He knew you'd pull it closed when the coffee hit it, which meant you'd stop looking at the room." Garrett paused. He'd already taken the pictures by then. "I think he was trying to get us out of the café before either of us looked at him too closely." Something moved across her face that wasn't quite anger. It was the colder, quieter thing underneath anger. The realization that someone you trusted in a professional capacity had been doing careful damage for months while standing beside you and performing loyalty. "He's been in my company for 3 years, she said. "I know. I brought him from my last firm. He had referrals from 2 people I respect." "Voss is patient," Garrett said. "People like that don't move quickly. They build inside the thing and wait." She looked at the floor of the parking structure. Then she straightened. "What do I do?" He thought about it the way he used to think about problems in the field, not from the inside of the problem, where everything was noise and pressure, but from the outside, where the geometry was visible. "You don't confront Travis," he said. "Not yet. If he's already passed information to Voss, confronting him now just tells Voss you know. You need to find out exactly what moved and when, and you need to do that before he has any reason to believe you're looking. My IT director knows. Who else? 2 security staff I trust. Keep it there. Don't add people. He picked up the tablet again, scrolled back to the top of the access log. Give me a copy of this, and the footage stills. I know someone not law enforcement, not yet, who can tell me what the device in those images is capable of, which tells us what he was able to pull and what he wasn't. Miguel, she said. He looked at her. No, someone else. She didn't ask who. She accepted it the way she seemed to accept most things that she couldn't immediately verify, with the specific discipline of trusting the information that was available and not borrowing against what wasn't. The resignation letter, she said. Don't accept it. Don't reject it. Tell him you need time to process the transition properly. That's believable. He's your head of security. It would be irresponsible to let him walk out without a handover plan. She absorbed this. You're very good at this, she said. I used to do it professionally. I know. She looked at him directly. Is it strange? Doing it again? He considered the question honestly, which wasn't what he usually did when people asked him versions of it. Usually he gave the answer that closed the subject. With her, for reasons he couldn't entirely account for, he gave the real one. Yes, he said, and no, the thinking doesn't go away. You can stop using it, but the way your brain is wired doesn't change. Strange part is, he paused. The strange part is that it doesn't feel bad. And I'm not sure how I feel about that. She was quiet for a moment. In the parking structure, a car 2 levels up started its engine and the sound echoed down. You came when I texted, she said. Yes. You didn't ask what it was about. You asked where I was. He looked at her. That's how you respond when someone tells you something's wrong. She looked like she had something to say to that and then decided not to say it, which he appreciated. What happened over the next 4 days moved quickly once it started. Garrett sent the footage stills to a former naval intelligence contact named Briggs, who confirmed by the following morning that the device in Travis's hands was a commercially modified extraction unit capable of pulling encrypted files from a server without triggering standard monitoring alerts, the kind of modification that required both technical knowledge and access to supply channels that didn't appear in any normal procurement catalog. That confirmation narrowed the picture considerably. Travis had improvised this. He'd come into Whitlock Aerospace already equipped. Garrett brought that to Maren over the phone at 6 a.m. on a Wednesday. He was placed, she said. Or recruited early, Garrett said. Either way, it was planned. That morning, Maren's IT director ran a forensic audit of everything Travis had accessed. The audit took 9 hours. At the end of it, they had a precise inventory, 14 separate documents, 6 of which contained material from the DoD contract annex. 3 of those documents had been accessed within 48 hours of key meetings between Whitlock Aerospace and the Government Review Committee. Maren called Garrett again at 4 in the afternoon. Her voice was even, too even, in the way of someone who has decided to be functional and is succeeding through will alone. He had the security protocol for the Mercer presentation, she said. Corridon Systems has that document. They know exactly how our system is configured going in. They can propose a competing system that addresses our specific weaknesses before we even get to present. What's the timeline on Mercer? 3 weeks and 4 days. And Corridon's competing bid closes in 2 weeks. He worked through it. If Voss doesn't have the document yet, he said, Travis still has to deliver, which means he's either already passed it or he's waiting for the right moment. How do we know which? We give him a reason to move. She went quiet for a moment. He could hear her thinking. You want to create pressure, she said. I want to create urgency. Urgency makes people move before they're ready. People who move before they're ready make mistakes. He paused. If you announce internally small group, something that could reach Travis, that you're doing a full security audit before the Mercer presentation, he's going to try to pass whatever he has before the audit catches him. And when he tries to pass it, we'll be watching. She thought for a moment. That requires someone watching Travis in real time. Yes. Will you do it? He was in his garage. He looked around at the half-assembled engine on the work table, the clean tools in their brackets on the wall, the ordinary machinery of the life he'd built. He thought about Piper doing long division at the kitchen table. He thought about the 3 minutes in the morning at the kitchen window. For this, he said yes. He wasn't entirely sure why he said yes. Practical answer was that he was probably the most qualified person available for it, which was true. The longer answer was something he wasn't ready to articulate yet. even to himself. He organized the surveillance, simply nothing elaborate, nothing that required infrastructure he didn't have. He and Miguel, who agreed without needing it explained at length, took alternating positions near the building over the following 2 days. Not inside. Outside, in the kind of ordinary parking lot presence that people don't register as significant because it doesn't look like anything. Travis moved on the third day. He came out of the Burnett Road building at 11:47 p.m., which was 40 minutes after the last security staff had logged out. He was carrying a soft-sided briefcase that he hadn't brought in that morning. He walked to his car. He sat in it for 11 minutes. Then he drove to a bar on North Loop, where he sat in a back booth and met a man Garrett didn't recognize. 50s. Good suit, the kind of careful anonymity that has money behind it. Garrett photographed the meeting from across the room, seated at the bar with a glass of water he didn't touch, and a baseball cap and the particular expression of someone who is waiting for a friend and not thinking about anything in particular. The briefcase moved across the table. The man in the good suit left first. Travis sat for another 20 minutes, ordered a drink he finished slowly, and then left. Garrett had what he needed. He called Maren from the parking lot. It happened, he said. She was quiet for a moment. Okay, she said. Just that. Okay. The sound of someone absorbing something difficult and deciding to keep moving. He drove home. He sat in the truck in the driveway for a while, in the dark, with the engine off. The neighborhood was quiet. Through the front window, he could see the lamp on in the living room, which meant Dolores from next door, who had stayed with Piper, was watching television. He thought about what he'd just done, the sitting in the bar, the photographs, the call. How easily it had come back, how little of it had felt like effort. He wasn't sure if that was a comfort or a warning. What he did know, and this was the thing he sat with in the dark until he was ready to go inside, was that he'd done it for Maren. Not for the mission, not for the contract, not for the abstract principle of it. For her specifically, and for the specific damage that was being done to something she'd built with real effort over real years. That distinction mattered to him. He wasn't sure why it mattered as much as it did. He went inside. He thanked Dolores, who asked no questions. He checked on Piper, who was asleep with the library book open again on a different page, meaning she'd woken up and read and fallen back asleep at some point. Turned off the living room lamp and sat in the dark for a while longer. Tomorrow he would take the photographs to Maren. She would take them to her legal team, and from there to the authorities, and the thing would begin its slow progress through the systems designed to handle it. Travis Rourke would face consequences. Voss and Corden systems would face their own accounting. The Mercer presentation would be reconfigured around updated protocols, and it would either succeed or it wouldn't, and that part was not his to carry. He knew all of that. What he didn't know yet, what he was sitting in the dark to figure out, without any particular success, was what he was going to do with the fact that for the first time in 5 years, he'd spent 4 days moving through a problem that mattered to him, and it hadn't felt like loss. It had felt like something else entirely. He sat with that for a long time before he went to bed. The photographs went to Maren's legal team on a Thursday morning, and by Thursday afternoon the situation had acquired the particular momentum of things that have been moving underground for a long time, finally reaching the surface. Her attorneys contacted the FBI field office in Austin. 2 agents came to the Burnett Road building that same evening, quiet and unhurried, the way federal investigators are when they already have more than they need and are simply collecting the physical confirmation. They reviewed the access logs, the forensic audit, the footage stills, and Garrett's photographs from the bar on North Loop. They interviewed Maren for 2 hours. They asked for Garrett's contact information, which she provided, and one of the agents called him at 9 p.m. and asked a series of specific, well-organized questions that he answered accurately and without elaboration. The agent thanked him and hung up. Travis Rourke was contacted by federal investigators the following morning. Garrett didn't know the details of that conversation and didn't try to find them out. What he knew, because Maren told him that afternoon, was that Travis had retained a lawyer within the hour, which meant he'd understood immediately that the posture of managed denial was no longer available to him. Harlan, Voss, and Corden systems retained lawyers by end of business Friday. The briefcase, it turned out, had contained a physical drive along with printed schematics, the kind of parallel redundancy that people use when they don't fully trust digital transfer. The physical drive was recovered. The printed documents were not, which meant they were either destroyed or already distributed, and the investigators were working on determining which. Maren had been advised that the Mercer presentation timeline could still hold if she moved quickly on updated protocols, which she was already doing. Her IT director had been working around the clock for 3 days. Garrett learned all of this in pieces, partly from Maren and partly from Miguel, who had connections to people who followed these things and was not above using them. What he did not anticipate was Maren's call on Saturday morning, not a text this time. A call at 8:15 while he was in the garage with the inboard engine that had been waiting patiently through the entire previous week for him to finish what he'd started. "Are you busy?" she asked. "I'm always busy on Saturday morning." "I know, I'm sorry." A pause. "I need to see you. Not about the investigation. About something else." He wiped his hands on a rag. "What time?" "Whenever Piper's settled. She's at a friend's until noon." "Then now, if that's all right." She arrived 20 minutes later in a car he hadn't seen before, practical, dark blue, the kind of vehicle that suggested she owned several and chose them by function rather than statement. She was in weekend clothes, which he'd seen before, and she looked better than Thursday, but not quite as composed as her default, which meant she was carrying something she hadn't finished processing. He brought her into the kitchen because the living room felt formal and the garage felt like a statement. She sat at the kitchen table where Piper did her homework, and he put coffee in front of her without asking, and she wrapped both hands around the mug the way people do when they need something to hold. He sat across from her. "You saved my company," she said. "I helped," he said. "There's a difference, Garrett." She looked at him directly. "If Travis had gotten those documents to Voss before the Mercer deadline, we would have lost the contract. Contract represents 4 years of development work and the funding that lets us move into the next phase. Without it, she stopped herself. I'm not going to pretend it was a small thing. I'm not pretending either. I know it wasn't small. I'm just telling you that it wasn't only me. You organized it. You ran surveillance for 4 nights on a situation that had nothing to do with you. It had something to do with you, he said, which made it have something to do with me." She looked at him when he said that. She didn't look away. "I want to offer you a position," she said. He picked up his coffee. "Head of corporate security," she said. "Full authority over the function. I'd want you to build the team from scratch, your criteria, your process. The compensation is," she named a number. It was a significant number. "Benefits, equity stake at the 18-month mark, and full autonomy over your scheduling within reason. I know you have a daughter. I'd want the arrangement to account for that from the beginning." He drank his coffee. "No," he said, she had expected this. He could see it in the fact that she didn't flinch or recalibrate. She'd prepared for it. "Tell me why," she said. "Because I'm not a corporate security director. That's not what I'm built for, and it's not what I want." He set down the mug. "I'd be good at it for about 6 months. Then I'd start cutting corners on the parts that bore me, which is the administrative half of it, and you'd end up managing around my limitations. You don't need that. You need someone who actually wants the whole job. I could restructure the role," she said. "You'd be restructuring it around my preferences, which means you'd be redesigning a critical function to accommodate one person. That's not smart, and you know it." She looked at him. "You're telling me no and also explaining why my offer is a bad idea," she said. "That's an unusual response to a job offer." "You asked me why," he said. "That's why." She was quiet for a moment. She turned the mug in her hands. "Then I'll increase the compensation," she said. The number she offered was considerably larger than the first. He shook his head. "Garrett," something shifted in her voice. She was moving off the professional register, entering something more unguarded. "You're a single father who repairs boat engines for people who don't appreciate the work. I know what that pays. I know what your life costs. I'm not trying to diminish what you've built here, I mean that. But I'm sitting across from someone who ran a 4-night surveillance operation with the precision of someone who does this in his sleep, and you're telling me you'd rather keep pulling carburetors out of lake boats." "Yes," he said. "That doesn't make sense. It makes complete sense," he said. "It just doesn't make the kind of sense you're used to." She pressed. "Explain it to me." He looked at the kitchen table. At the edge of it, there was a faint pencil mark where Piper had once been drawing, and her hand had slipped off the paper. He'd never fully erased it. He wasn't sure why. When I left the teams, he said slowly, I had a conversation with myself that took about 2 years to finish. Because it wasn't a simple thing walking away from that life. I was good at it. I liked most of it. I was trained for it from the time I was 21 years old, and it fit the shape of me in a way that very few things do. He paused. But Claire was gone, and Piper was 3 years old. And I looked at the math very carefully, which is something I know how to do, and what the math told me was that I could have the career, or I could have my daughter's childhood, but I could not have both. Not really. Not in any version that was honest about what the job actually requires. Maren said nothing. I made the choice, he said. I don't regret it. What I won't do is trade it for a bigger number, because the number isn't what the choice was about. He looked at her. If I take your job, I start traveling. I start carrying a phone I can't ignore. I start missing things that can't be recovered. Piper is 7. She'll be 17 faster than I can account for. Decade is... He stopped. I'm not giving that away. Not for any salary. The kitchen was quiet. Outside, somewhere down the block, a neighbor's dog was barking at something intermittently, the way dogs do on Saturday mornings when they've decided something in the yard requires their continued professional attention. Maren set down her coffee mug. She looked at the table and then at him, and something in her face had changed, not softened exactly, but reoriented. She was looking at him the way she'd looked at the parking structure that night when he'd said he asked where she was because that's how you respond when something's wrong. Like she was revising a category. I've been running this company for 6 years, she said. I've made hundreds of decisions. Personnel decisions, financial decisions, strategic decisions. I'm good at it. She paused. What I am not good at is... She seemed to search for the right word and then decide on the honest one. Stopping. I don't know how to measure success by anything except what I built next. And sitting here, listening to you explain why a 7-figure offer isn't the point, I feel like I'm missing something that should be obvious. It's not obvious, he said. It took me 2 years to figure it out. How did you figure it out? He thought about that for a moment. I stopped making decisions based on what I could do, he said, and started making them based on what I actually wanted. They're not the same question, even though they look like it. Quiet for a long time. I want to ask you something, she said. And I want you to answer it the same way you've been answering everything else. Okay, is the reason you won't take the job as any part of it about us? She held his gaze without wavering. About not wanting to complicate something that's... She left the space at the end of that sentence open. He looked at her. He'd known this question was in the room. He'd been deciding, throughout the whole conversation, how much of the honest answer to give, which was a sign in itself he didn't usually calculate honesty. He either gave it or he didn't. Partly, he said. She absorbed that. Which part, she asked. I don't know yet, he said. Which is unusual for me. That seemed to be enough. She didn't push further. She picked up her coffee again, took a sip, and looked at the kitchen with the considering air of someone seeing the room for the first time, the organized plainness of it, the pencil mark on the table, chipped rabbit ear mug still in the drying rack from Piper's breakfast. She uses that mug every morning? Maren asked, nodding at it. Every morning since she was 4. She'd revolt if it disappeared. I had a mug like that when I was a kid, she said. Blue, with a handle shaped like a fish. I dropped it when I was 11, and I remember crying about it for longer than was reasonable. Kids know what matters, he said. She smiled at that. Not the professional, managed version, a real one, smaller and less composed than the others he'd seen. I'm going to make you a different offer, she said. He waited. I want to create something at the company. Program not just a policy, an actual structure. Veterans in flexible security roles. Positions designed from the ground up so that people can do serious work without sacrificing the other thing. Family thing. The being present thing. She was thinking aloud now, which was different from how she'd spoken in the first half of the conversation, less polished, more actual. I've been thinking about it since you said no the first time. Since last week, actually. What would that look like, he said. I don't know yet. That's partly why I'm here. She looked at him. I want to know if it's possible. I want to know what you'd need. If you were someone who'd been out of service for 5 years and had a kid and needed the work to fit around the life instead of the other way around, what would actually make that possible? He considered it. You'd need to mean it, he said, not as a statement, as a practice. Because veterans have heard the statement before. They've taken the job that claimed to be flexible and found out at month 3 that flexible meant flexible when nothing urgent was happening, which in a growing aerospace company means never. I know, she said. I've done that actually. Not intentionally, I've told people things were flexible, and then the work expanded and the flexibility contracted. I'm aware of the pattern. He appreciated that she said it without excusing it. You'd need hard limits, he said, not soft guidelines. If someone's kid has a school event on Thursday, Thursday is non-negotiable. Not we'll try to accommodate, not assuming nothing critical comes up. Non-negotiable. And the project management has to actually account for that, not treat it as an exception every time. She was listening with the kind of attention that doesn't perform itself. What else? Part-time structures with real advancement paths, he said. Not part-time as a concession, part-time as a full option. Because right now, in most companies, the people who work reduced hours get passed over for anything that matters, which means the most experienced people opt into full-time or leave. You'd lose your best people the same way you'd have found them if you don't fix that. How would you fix it? Evaluate on output, not availability. What did the person produce? Not how many hours were they in the building. He paused. That requires your managers to actually manage instead of supervising attendance, which is harder. But it's what makes the difference between a program and a press release. She was looking at him with an expression that had moved past listening into something else, the specific focus of someone building a real structure in real time. Would you help me design it? She said. As a consultant, he said. 3 days a week. School events are non-negotiable. She almost smiled. You're applying your own criteria. Seemed honest. What's your rate? He named a number. It was considerably less than what she'd offered for the security director role, and she didn't try to inflate it, which he registered. Done, she said. They sat with that for a moment. The dog down the block had stopped barking. The kitchen was quiet in the specific Saturday morning way that feels different from the quiet of other days. There's something else, Garrett said. She looked at him. The way Travis behaved in that cafe, he said, not the espionage part. The moment before the hand on my shoulder, the escalation, the slap. That was a pattern, not an incident. People don't do that once. I know, she said. I've been sitting with that. The people around you, he said carefully, the people you give authority to. That matters as much as the security protocols and the access logs. You're telling me I missed something with Travis. I'm telling you that the things that protect a company aren't always technical. He kept his voice level. Sometimes they're just paying attention to how people treat the person they think doesn't matter. She was quiet for a long moment. He thought you didn't matter, she said. He thought I was a nobody who wandered into his principal's space and needed to be managed. That's the version of me he saw. He paused. Most people in my position would have just left. And he knew that. That's why he did it. And you didn't leave.
No.
Because of who you were, she said. What you'd been trained to do. No, he said. Because of Piper. I didn't leave because she was watching, and I won't teach her that walking away from something wrong is the same as being the bigger person. He looked at Maren steadily. Those are different things. She looked at him for a long time. I want to make that part of the program too, she said quietly. The part about how people treat the person they think doesn't matter. I want that to be part of how we hire, how we train managers. She paused. I've been thinking about what you said in the cafe. You didn't say it to me directly, but you said it to Travis. The way you didn't retaliate, didn't perform, you just... She stopped. You just stayed exactly as large as you actually were. He didn't respond to that. Outside, he heard a car pull up Dolores' station wagon, which had a distinctive rattle in the passenger door that he'd offered to fix twice and she'd declined twice. He heard the door, and then the quick footsteps on the path, and then the front door opening, and Piper's voice in the hallway. Dad, whose car is that outside? Kitchen, he called. Piper appeared in the doorway with her jacket half off, and her hair escaping its braid, carrying the specific energy of a 7-year-old who has been at a friend's house all morning and hasn't fully metabolized the experience yet. She stopped when she saw Maren. Oh, she said. Hey, Piper, Maren said. Natural enough, no performance in it. Piper looked between them with the evaluative eyes. Then she finished taking off her jacket and hung it on the hook by the door, which she didn't always remember to do, Garrett noted, but always remembered when there was a visitor present. You're the woman from the café, Piper said, stating fact, not accusation. I am, Maren said. You have a good memory. I remember most things, Piper said, moving to the counter and opening the refrigerator. Dad says it's a gift. I think it's just normal. She pulled out the orange juice. Were you talking about work? We were, Garrett said. Good work or bad work? He looked at Maren. Good work, Maren said. Think. Piper poured her juice with the focused care of someone who'd spilled it before and was applying the lesson. Dad doesn't talk about work usually. Not really. He talked to me about it, Maren said. Piper looked at her father. Something passed through her expression, a calculation he couldn't entirely read, which happened more often than it used to. Okay, she said, in the same tone she'd used the night he'd told her Maren's name. The one that covered a great deal of ground. She took her juice to the table and sat in the chair beside Maren's with the natural, uncalculated ease of a child who doesn't yet have a mechanism for performing comfort. Is your painting still up? She asked Maren. At the cafe. Do you go there a lot? Maren blinked. I don't have a painting. Not your painting. My painting. Well, not a real one. They didn't keep it, she considered. But in my head, I keep it there. The one with the 3 people and the water. I repainted it 3 times. Maren looked at Garrett. Her piece at the exhibition, he said quietly. I know, Maren said. She looked at Piper. Your dad told me about it. He said it was the best thing in the room. Piper accepted this without false modesty. It was, she agreed. The horse drawing was good too, but the person got the legs wrong, and horses have long legs. They do, Maren said. Can I show you a picture of it? Piper asked. Dad took one. I'd like that, Maren said. Garrett got his phone and found the photograph. He handed it to Maren. She held it and looked at it for longer than a polite look required, actually looked at it, the layered water, the indistinct figures on the shore. Something moved in her face that she didn't try to manage. It's beautiful, she said. I'm going to paint a bigger one next year, Piper said, drinking her juice. With more detail. The people in this one are kind of blurry because I ran out of time, but the water's exactly right. The water is exactly right, Maren agreed. Piper looked at her with those direct amber-ringed eyes. You can stay for lunch if you want, she said. It was offered with the directness of a child who makes a decision and then makes it, without worrying too much about how it lands. Garrett looked at Maren. Maren looked at him for just a moment, checking, not for permission, but for read of the room. He gave the smallest nod. I'd like that, Maren said. Thank you. Piper nodded, satisfied, and went back to her juice. Garrett got up and opened the refrigerator and looked at its contents with the pragmatic assessment of someone who had not planned for company and was working with what was available. There was leftover rice, some ground beef that needed to be used, a bell pepper, and the remains of a block of cheddar. He could make something workable from that. He always could. He stood at the stove with his back to the table, and behind him he could hear Maren asking Piper about school, and Piper answering with the concentrated detail she brought to things she found interesting, and the kitchen filled with the ordinary sounds of a Saturday afternoon. Cooked. It wasn't elegant. The rice was a day old, and the cheddar was the wrong kind for what he was attempting. But it was food, and it was warm, and it was enough, and when he put it on the table, Piper looked at her plate with the critical eye of someone who had opinions, and then decided, apparently, to keep them to herself. They ate. The conversation moved the way conversations do when nobody is driving it from Piper's school to Maren's company without any particular logic, from what Piper wanted to be when she grew up, which was either a marine biologist or an architect, and she was keeping both options open, to what Maren had wanted to be when she was 7, which was an astronaut, which made Piper look at her with sudden sharp interest because the aerospace company suddenly made sense in a way it hadn't before. Did you try? Piper asked. I tried a version of it, Min said. I couldn't fly spacecraft, but I spent years making them safer. Piper considered this with the seriousness it deserved. That's actually better, she decided. Astronauts go once or twice. You help all of them. Maren looked at her plate for a moment. I hadn't thought about it that way, she said. Dad says the people who fix things are more important than the people who use them, Piper said. No offense, she added to Garrett. None taken, he said. I said it. He means himself, Piper explained to Maren. He fixes things. I know he does, Maren said. Garrett looked across the table at this woman who had walked into his life twice, once in the dark in a foreign country, and once in a cafe on a Saturday morning, and who was now sitting in his kitchen eating reheated rice with his daughter, and not making any of it larger than it needed to be. He thought about what she'd said, that she didn't know how to measure success by anything except what she built next. He thought she was learning. He looked at Piper, who had finished her rice and was now looking between the two adults with that measuring expression she used when she was assembling a picture. He looked back at the table, the ordinary clutter of a Saturday lunch, mismatched plates, the chipped mug in the drying rack, afternoon light coming through the window above the sink at the angle it always came at this time of year. Thought about the number Maren had offered him that morning. He thought about the consulting arrangement, 3 days a week, school events non-negotiable, and how that had felt when he'd said it. Not like a compromise, like a thing stated plainly in the language of what he actually wanted. That was a feeling he didn't take for granted. He picked up the plates and carried them to the sink. I'll wash, Piper announced, which was not something she usually volunteered, and Maren caught Garrett's eye briefly over the table, and the corners of her mouth did something she didn't fully commit to. I'll dry, Maren said. Garrett stepped back from the sink and let them. He stood in the kitchen of his small house on the east side of Austin on a Saturday afternoon in the ordinary light, listening to his daughter explain to Maren Whitlock the correct and incorrect ways to rinse a plate, and for the first time in a very long time not in the field, not in the cafe, not in the parking structure at midnight, but here, in the most unremarkable possible version of his life, he felt something settle in him that he hadn't known was still standing on edge. Couldn't name it exactly. He didn't try. He just stood in the kitchen and let it be what it was. The federal case against Travis Rourke moved through its early stages the way these things do slowly, then not slowly at all. By the third week after the investigators' first visit to the Burnett Road building, the scope of what Travis had delivered to Cordson Systems had been substantially mapped. It was worse than the initial estimate and better than the worst-case scenario, which Maren's attorney described as a reasonable outcome given the circumstances, and which Maren described, privately, to Garrett as exactly the kind of answer that makes you want to throw something across the room. She didn't throw anything, but she told him she'd wanted to, which he thought was its own kind of progress. Travis Rourke cooperated with investigators in the end, not immediately, not gracefully, but thoroughly enough that the case against Harlan Voss and Cordon Systems built itself into something the prosecutors considered solid. Voss had been careful. The way careful people are when they're doing something they know requires care, but Travis had kept records of his own, which was either his leverage plan or his conscience, depending on how generously you read it, and those records filled in the gaps that the federal investigators had been working around. Garrett learned the outline of all this from Maren over the course of several weeks, in pieces, the way you learn things from someone when the information arrives in the gaps between other conversations over the phone, while Piper was doing homework, once over coffee at a different cafe several miles from Linwood, once in a parking lot after a meeting at the Burnett Road building that he'd attended in his new capacity as an independent consultant and found both useful and deeply bureaucratic. The consulting work was real work. He hadn't expected to find it as engaging as he did, which he suspected said something about him that he was still deciding how to feel about. Maren had meant what she said about the Veteran Employment Program. It wasn't a gesture, wasn't a line item in a corporate responsibility report. She had assigned actual budget to it and actual people, and she wanted Garrett involved in the structural design because she understood, correctly, that the difference between a program that works and a program that sounds good is whether it was built by someone who knows what the problem actually feels like from the inside. He brought Miguel in as a consultant on the benefits design side, which Miguel accepted with the same unhurried pragmatism he applied to everything. Two of them spent a Tuesday afternoon in a conference room on the third floor of the Burnett Road building, going through what had and hadn't worked in every veteran transition program either of them had encountered or heard about secondhand, which was a longer list of failures than successes, and therefore more instructive. Problem is always the same, Miguel said at one point. He had a yellow legal pad in front of him that was mostly doodles. They designed the job for who they want the person to be, not who the person actually is when they come out. Which is tired, Miguel said simply. Competent and tired and not sure what any of this looks like now. He tapped the pad with his pen. You build a program that starts there, you've got something. You build a program that starts with what you need from them. You've got a retention problem in 18 months. Garrett had written that down and later shown it to Maren, who had read it twice, and then told him she wanted Miguel's exact words in the program's founding document. The framework they eventually produced wasn't revolutionary. That was in a way the point. It was practical. Defined deliverables instead of defined hours, hard limits on scheduling that applied equally to senior and junior staff, mentorship structures that paired experienced veterans with the program coordinators rather than the other way around, and a 6-month review process that assessed fit from both directions. The company would tell the employee what they needed. The employee would tell the company what wasn't working, and the result of that conversation would actually change something, which required a level of institutional humility that Garrett had been explicit about being non-negotiable. Maren had pushed back on 2 elements and conceded on both after he'd explained his reasoning, which he noted was the behavior of someone who disagreed in good faith rather than someone who was performing openness. He filed that away alongside the other things he was filing away about her, which had become, over the months since the café, a considerable collection. He noticed that she called when she said she would call. He noticed that she asked Piper actual questions, rather than the benign deflecting questions. Adults often ask children, not how's school, but what are you working on? And not do you like your teacher, but what does your teacher think is the most important thing and why? He noticed that when Maren was wrong about something she said so, directly and without the small architectural elaborations that most people build around an admission. He noticed that she was underneath the professional machinery she'd assembled around herself, a person who was genuinely trying, and that the trying was not effortless, and that she knew it wasn't, and kept trying anyway. He noticed that he was noticing all of this. He didn't say anything about it for a long time. The Mercer presentation happened 6 weeks after Travis's arrest. Maren had rebuilt the security annex entirely, worked with a new security director she'd brought in from outside, a woman named Diane Kowalski, who was thorough and unflappable, and had the specific gift of being able to explain complex protocols to government reviewers without making them feel like they were being talked down to. Garrett had met Diane twice and liked her immediately, which was partly instinct and partly the fact that she'd reviewed his surveillance photographs from the bar on North Loop and said, without ceremony, good camera discipline. You stayed in profile the whole time. He'd appreciated that she knew what she was looking at. The Mercer contract was awarded to Whitlock Aerospace on a Thursday morning. Maren called him from a conference room before she'd fully left the building where the announcement was made, which meant the call came in the middle of Garrett's consultation with a client about a twin-engine shaft replacement, and he stepped outside the garage with grease on his hands to answer it. We got it, she said. I know, he said. You know? You wouldn't have called this fast if you hadn't. Pause, then we got it. And the second time she said it, something different was in it, not triumph, which he'd expected, but something quieter. Something that sounded like the feeling of having held something very carefully for a long time, and finally being able to set it down without breaking it. Congratulations, he said. Thank you. Another pause. Garrett. Yeah, thank you, she said again, and this time it meant something else entirely. He went back into the garage. He finished the shaft consultation. He picked Piper up from school at 3:15 and made dinner and helped her with a book report on a story about a girl who runs away to live in a museum, which Piper had opinions about, and the evening moved through its ordinary stations until Piper was in bed and the house was quiet. He sat on the back step for a while. The Austin night was warm and smelled like the neighbor's jasmine, which climbed the fence and had been threatening to overtake it since the spring. He thought about Maren's voice when she'd said thank you the second time. He thought about the kitchen on the Saturday she'd stayed for lunch, and Piper at the sink explaining plate rinsing, and the way Maren had dried dishes in his kitchen with the focused attention of someone doing something they'd decided to take seriously. He thought about Claire, He did this less than he used to, and in a different register than before. In the first years after losing her, thinking about Claire was like pressing on something that hadn't healed sharp. Immediate, the whole of the loss arriving at once. Now it was different. She was still present in him, still the person by whom he measured things, still the woman he thought of when he watched Piper do something particular to Claire's way of doing things. But she was present the way things are that have become part of the structure load-bearing, but not a wound. He didn't know when exactly it had shifted. He suspected there hadn't been a single moment of it. He suspected it had happened the way most real things happen, which is gradually and then all at once, and you only see it looking backward. He sat on the back step until the jasmine smell was just the night and not a particular thought anymore, and then he went inside. Called Maren the following evening. "I want to ask you something," he said. "Okay," she said. "Not about the program. Not about the company." A brief silence. "Okay," she said differently. "Do you want to go somewhere with Piper and me on Saturday? She's been asking to go to Barton Springs since before the school year ended, and I've been putting it off because the parking situation it's a whole thing." But she's earned a yes. The silence on the other end lasted about 3 seconds, which he understood was not hesitation but adjustment, the small recalibration of someone who had been expecting something and received something adjacent to it that required a different kind of answer. "I'd like that," she said. "It's not a complicated thing," he said. "Public swimming hole, and the parking is genuinely bad." "I know what Barton Springs is," she said. "I've just never been." "You've lived in Austin 4 years, and you've never been to Barton Springs?" "I've been busy." "Everyone's busy," he said. "That's not an excuse." "No," she agreed. "It isn't." He heard something in her voice that he recognized from his own internal geography, the specific sound of someone acknowledging, without drama or defense. They have been so occupied with building toward the next thing that the present thing has been consistently deferred, and that this is a real cost and not a scheduling issue. "Saturday," he said. "Saturday," she said. She showed up at 9:15 with sunscreen and a towel and a small cooler she'd packed, which Piper examined with professional interest and found satisfactory. Parking was bad, as advertised. They walked further than Maren's shoes were quite right for, which she didn't mention, and Piper spent the first 40 minutes in the water, and the next 20 explaining to Maren the correct technique for navigating the spring's current, which required that Maren get in, which she did, without complaint, in the cold water. And Garrett stood at the edge and watched his daughter teach a CEO how to float on her back in a limestone swimming hole in central Texas on a Saturday morning in late spring. He waded in. The water was cold enough to make him exhale sharply, which it always was, and then his body adjusted. The way it did, and he floated beside them in the green-lit water while the city moved on above the trees. And Piper said with authority that the secret to floating was not thinking about sinking, which was advice that Maren said she intended to apply to other areas of her life. "Dad can float for a really long time," Piper offered. "It's because he's calm." "I know," Maren said. "Not like relaxed calm," Piper clarified. "Inside calm. It's different." Garrett looked at the sky through the canopy of trees. He said nothing. "I know," Maren said again quietly. They stayed until early afternoon. They ate from Maren's cooler sandwiches she'd made herself, which she admitted somewhat defensively she didn't do often, and which were fine, slightly oversalted, the bread a little compressed from the ice pack. Piper ate hers without comment, which was, for Piper, a form of diplomacy. Garrett ate his and said it was good, which was approximately true. On the drive home, Piper fell asleep in the back seat within 10 minutes. She had that gift she could sleep anywhere she'd used her body fully, and the springs had used her body fully. Maren sat in the passenger seat with her damp hair and her slightly pink shoulders and looked out the window at Austin going by in the afternoon light. "This city is different on Saturdays," she said. Not to him, quite. Just aloud. "It's the same city," he said. "You're just moving through it differently." She turned to look at him. "Is that what you did?" she said. "When you came here. You just moved through it differently." "I didn't have a choice," he said. "I had a 3-year-old who needed me to be somewhere specific at specific times. That changes what a city is." She was quiet for a moment. "I chose Austin for the aerospace corridor," she said. "Talent pool and the proximity to the defense contractors in San Antonio. The whole reason." She looked back out the window. I've been here 4 years, and I didn't know Barton Springs was cold. Now you know, now I know. She was quiet again. I've been thinking about what you said, about making decisions based on what you want instead of what you can do. That takes a while to work out. I've been working on it. She turned back to him. I bought a plant last week for my apartment. A real one, not a succulent. Kind that needs actual attention. He glanced at her. How's it doing? It's fine. I've been watering it on a schedule. She paused. Which might be missing the point, but I'm starting somewhere. He almost smiled at that. He let himself slightly. You're starting somewhere, he agreed. In the back seat, Piper made a small sound in her sleep and resettled her cheek against the headrest. Maren turned to look at her briefly. Her expression did the thing it sometimes, did the thing that wasn't sentiment but was close to it, the thing of a person looking at something and feeling the specific weight of it land. She turned back to the road. Garrett, she said, yeah. She seemed to organize something internally. He let her. I don't want to be careful about this forever, she said. I know why we've been careful. I know it makes sense, and I know you have Piper to think about, and I'm not pushing. But I need you to know that I'm not going anywhere. I'm not going to decide this is too complicated and recalibrate towards something easier. It's not who I am, he drove. I know, he said. Do you? He looked at the road for a moment. You drove 4 years in the wrong direction because you were building something. You weren't careless, you just didn't have the right map. He paused. I'm not holding that against you. She looked at him. He looked at the road. I'm not going anywhere either, he said. It was quiet when he said it, the kind of quiet that carries more than the words. She didn't respond immediately. When she did, she just said, okay, the same word Piper used for things that covered a great deal of ground. Pulled into his driveway. Piper woke up with the engine stopping. As she always did, she had some internal calibration that distinguished the vibration of moving from the vibration of arrival. Climbed out of the back seat, with her towel and her sneakers, and walked toward the front door, still slightly asleep, and Garrett got out and unlocked it, and she went directly inside, and he heard the couch absorb her. He stood in the driveway. Maren was standing by the passenger door. The afternoon had gone golden in the way Austin afternoons do in late spring. The light hitting everything at an angle that made ordinary things look like they were being seen for the last time and the first time simultaneously. Thank you for today, she said. She'll want to take you back, he said. You've been initiated. There's no getting out of it. I don't want to get out of it. He looked at her. She looked at him. It wasn't a complicated moment. It was just two people standing in a driveway in the late afternoon, understanding each other clearly, which is rarer than it should be, and more valuable than most things. I'll call you Sunday, he said. I'll answer, she said. She got in her car. He went inside. He sat beside Piper on the couch. She was mostly asleep, her face slack and unguarded the way children look when they're genuinely out, no performance in it at all. He looked at her for a while, in the golden light coming through the front window. He thought about the version of himself that had walked into Café Linwood 8 weeks ago with a 7-year-old in a navy blue dress and a plan that extended no further than coffee and an art exhibition. He thought about the version of himself that had come back from the last deployment with the scar fresh, and a 3-year-old he barely knew how to hold, and the certain knowledge that something had to change, even though change at that point meant giving up the only thing he'd ever been formally good at. He thought about 5 years of mornings at the kitchen window, 3 minutes of quiet before the footsteps in the hall. He thought about how you could spend years building a careful life and still have a Saturday morning in a cafe, rearrange everything not violently, not all at once, but with the particular persistence of something that knows where it's going and is simply waiting for the right door. The things that matter don't always announce themselves. That was something he'd learned in the field and relearned in fatherhood, and was learning again now, in a different key. Travis Rourke had thought he was managing a nobody in a cafe. What he'd actually done was put his hand on the load-bearing thing and pushed, and everything that followed had followed from that. Not because of who Garrett had been in the Navy, because of what he'd decided to be, since the version of himself that stayed, that showed up, that moved his daughter behind him without making it a performance. You can't always protect people from the hard parts, but you can make sure they see you stay standing. That was the whole lesson, as far as Garrett Vance could tell. The rest was application. The months that followed had the particular texture of real things being built not smoothly, not without friction, but steadily. The Veteran Employment Program launched in September under the name Open Ground, which Maren had asked Garrett to name and which he'd resisted naming until Piper, who'd heard them discussing it at the kitchen table, suggested it with the offhand certainty of someone who had found the obvious answer the adults kept looking past. Maren had written it down immediately. Garrett had looked at his daughter with the expression he sometimes had, the one where he was proud of her and slightly unsettled by how much she picked up, and wasn't sure which feeling to lead with. Open ground, Piper had explained with some impatience at their slowness. Because when you come out of somewhere enclosed, the first thing is space. You need space before you need anything else. She was 7 years old and not yet 8. The first cohort of Open Ground enrolled 11 veterans in the fall, a mix of roles across the company, from technical analysis to facilities management to 2 positions in Maren's restructured security division. Not all of them thrived immediately. One left after 3 months, not because the program failed, but because the fit wasn't right, and the program was honest enough to let that be the outcome without treating it as a failure. 2 others had rough first month's adjustment problems, scheduling conflicts that required active management, one situation that needed Miguel's particular kind of steady, unhurried attention before it resolved. But 8 of the 11 were still there at the 6-month review, doing actual work, and 4 of those 8 had flagged specific problems in the company's systems that wouldn't have been caught by people who hadn't operated in high-stakes environments. That was the return Maren presented to her board, which had been skeptical in the careful, liability-conscious way. Boards are skeptical of things that don't have precedent. She presented it without theater. The numbers made the argument. Garrett attended that board meeting. He sat at the back and said nothing, and watched Maren present with the compressed efficiency of someone who has learned to carry a room without appearing to push it. Afterward, in the hallway, the board chair, a man in his late 60s who had the particular energy of someone who had built things and wanted to know if other people actually understood how, stopped Garrett and asked who he was. "Consultant," Garrett said. The man looked at him with the assessment of someone who could read rooms. "You designed it," the man said. Mostly Garrett said. "It's a good program," the man said. "The instinct to evaluate on output instead of presence that's not obvious. Most people fight it." He paused. "Where'd you learn to think about it that way?" "Experience," Garrett said. The man nodded, as if this was a satisfying and complete answer, which to a certain kind of person it was. Travis Rourke pleaded guilty in November. The federal case against Harlan Voss and Corridon Systems was ongoing and expected to run considerably longer, as corporate espionage cases typically do, which Maren tracked with the controlled attention of someone who has decided to be informed without letting a legal proceeding become the organizing principle of her year. She had other things to organize her year around, which was, Garrett thought, probably the healthiest possible outcome. He was there when the plea agreement was announced. Not physically, he was in the garage working on a 17-foot fishing boat that had come in with a waterlogged bilge pump and needed more attention than the owner had expected. But Maren called him within the hour, and they talked for 20 minutes, and by the end of it, she sounded like someone who had finally put down a bag they'd been carrying so long they'd stopped noticing its weight. "Is it what you wanted?" he asked. "I wanted it to not have happened," she said. "I know, but given that it did," a pause. "It's enough," she said. "It's not everything, but it's enough." He thought that was a mature thing to say. He also thought that 6 months earlier she might not have been able to say it, which was a different kind of progress than the contract or the program or any of the measurable things. Piper turned 8 in October. She had requested a birthday at the lake, not Barton Springs, a different lake, one with a boat dock where she could watch the boats and ask questions that the dock workers answered patiently because she asked them with genuine interest rather than performance. Garrett had arranged it. Maren came. Miguel and his wife came, which had surprised Garrett when Miguel accepted the invitation so readily until Miguel said, simply, "She's 8 once," which was the kind of thing Miguel said that seemed obvious and landed with the weight of something that had taken years to know. Maren brought Piper a gift that she'd put visible thought into a set of professional-grade acrylics and a hardbound sketchbook, not the cheap kind, the kind with thick pages that hold the paint without buckling. She'd asked Garrett what Piper used, and then gone one step beyond it, which was the instinct of someone who understood that the best gifts aren't substitutes for what someone already has, but openings toward what they're becoming. Piper had opened it with the focused attention she brought to things she cared about, and then she'd looked at Maren with those amber-ringed eyes and said, "This is for the bigger painting." "I know," Maren said. "I'm going to start it soon," Piper said. "I have the composition. I just need the right day." "What makes a day the right one?" Maren asked. Piper thought about this seriously. "When you feel like you know what it's supposed to look like before you start," she said. "Otherwise, you're just guessing." Maren had looked at Garrett over the top of Piper's head. Something in the look said, "Your daughter is something else." And something else in it said, "I know. I know that every day." The bigger painting took 3 weeks. It happened in stages after school, on the kitchen table with newspaper spread underneath, because the acrylics were real paint and dried fast. Garrett watched it come together the way he watched most things Piper made, with the particular restraint of a parent who wants to say something encouraging at every stage and has learned that too much. Encouragement during the process breaks the concentration. It was larger than the first one. The water was more detailed. She'd figured out how to layer the color to get the depth she'd wanted in the original. Figures on the shore were less indistinct this time. 3 of them. A tall man, a smaller figure beside him, and a woman on the other side. She'd given each of them a face, roughly not portraits, but recognizable in the way that a child's rendering of people she knows is always recognizable, carried in the posture and the color of the clothing and the specific gesture of the hand. When she was finished, she stood back from it with the serious evaluation she always gave finished things. "Done," she said. "It's good," he said. "It's better than the first one," she said, which was true. "But not as good as the one after this will be. That's how it works," he said. "I know," she said. "Mrs. Okafor says that's what it means to be serious about something. You finish it and you already know how to do it better." He looked at the painting for a while after Piper had gone to set the table for dinner. The 3 figures on the shore, the water behind them, deep and layered and moving. The pale strip at the top that was unambiguously sky in this version decided no longer uncertain. He called Maren that evening and told her about it. "Can I see it?" she asked. "She'll want to show you herself," he said. "Come for dinner Saturday." "I'll be there," she said. She was. She sat across from Piper at the kitchen table, where the painting was propped against the wall, and she looked that against the with the same quality of attention she'd given the first photograph on his phone, actually. Looked, took her time, didn't perform the looking. Piper watched her. "Those are us," Piper said finally, because she couldn't hold it longer. "I know," Maren said. "I made your jacket red," Piper said. "'Cause Dad said you had a red jacket once, when you were younger and something happened." He said it was a good instinct. Maren looked at Garrett. He looked back. He hadn't told Piper that story, not the whole of it. He'd mentioned once, peripherally, that Maren had had good instincts in a difficult situation when she was young. Piper had retained it, stored it, applied it. He should have expected that. He almost always underestimated what she held on to. Maren's eyes had gone bright, the way they had at Barton Springs, the way they had at the birthday, the way they did when something came at her sideways, and she hadn't fully armored the approach. "Thank you, Piper," she said. "You can have it," Piper said. "For your apartment, the one with the plant." She paused. "Plants do better when there's something else in the room that's alive." "Scientific." Garrett looked at his daughter. He had no words for a moment. "Is that scientific?" he managed. "Mrs. Okafor said it," Piper said with finality. Maren made a sound that was somewhere between a laugh and something more complicated, and she pressed her fingers briefly to her popped mouth the way people do when they're containing something they didn't expect to need to contain. "I would be honored," she said. The year turned. There are things about a life that you can plan, and things that simply accumulate whether you plan for them or not. And the honest version of Garrett Vance's story, the version that doesn't clean the edges or resolve the difficulties into lessons they weren't at the time, is that the year following the café contained both kinds in equal measure. The Open Ground program required more active management than either he or Maren had projected, and there were months where the consulting work bled into the edges of his 3 days in ways he had to actively push back on. And pushing back was something he had to practice, because his instinct when he'd committed to something was to see it through completely and completely was not compatible with Piper's school schedule and his own sense of what the commitment to her actually meant. He had a direct conversation with Maren about it in February. Scope has expanded, he said. I know, she said. Which means I'm either going to have to narrow my involvement or you're going to have to hire someone to cover the parts I'm pulling back from. I know, she said again. I'm not giving you more time, he said. I want to be clear about that. I'm telling you what needs to change on your end. She looked at him. You think I'm going to push back? Most employers push back. I'm not most employers, she said. And you're not an employee. She picked up her coffee. I'll hire someone. Give me the job description. He wrote the job description that evening at the kitchen table after Piper was in bed. He sent it at 11 p.m., which was later than he usually worked, and she responded at 11:15 with, "This is good. Post it Monday, and then go to sleep." He'd looked at that for a moment and then put the phone down and gone to bed, and slept better than he usually did, which he noticed. Spring came. In April, Piper's school held another art exhibition. Garrett had marked it on the calendar the same week the school sent the flyer home, which happened in January. Because Piper had been preparing a piece since November and had been intermittently tense about it, in the specific way of someone who wants something to be good and is old enough now to know the distance between what they intend and what they make. She was 8 and had the artistic ambition of someone considerably older, which was partly training and partly temperament and partly, Garrett suspected, the result of being raised in a house where the person who loved her most was someone who applied the same standard to a marine engine as to anything else. If it's worth doing with the attention it deserves. He'd watched her work on the piece across those months without commenting. She'd restarted it twice. Both restarts had come after sessions where she'd stepped back and stood in front of the canvas with the look he now recognized as her assessment face, completely still, completely serious, face she got when she was measuring the distance between what she'd made and what she'd meant. The finished piece was abstract in a way her previous work hadn't been more color than form, the shapes gestural and deliberate. She'd used the professional acrylics. Colors were deep and layered, and the whole thing had a quality of movement that he didn't know how to describe, which meant it was working, because the things that work are always the ones that defeat your vocabulary. He stood in front of it for a long time. Well? Piper asked, beside him. 8 years old. Navy blue dress again, same as the first exhibition, because she had worn it then and she was observant about patterns. You know what I'm going to say, he said. Say it anyway. It's the best thing in this room, he said. It's the best thing I've made, she said. Matter of fact. Not pride, not false modesty, just the sober assessment of someone who has been working on something seriously and knows when they've moved forward. The next one will be better. I know, he said. Maren was there. She'd arrived at the gymnasium before them, which was something she'd started doing, arriving slightly ahead, because she knew he liked being on time, and she'd learned to build her own buffer. She was talking to Mrs. Okafor when they walked in, and when Piper spotted her, she went directly over without any of the usual circling. Maren looked at the painting for a long time. The movement, she said finally. How did you do that? Layering, Piper said, and not overworking the top layer. If you overwork it, you lose the depth underneath, and it goes flat. That applies to things other than painting, Maren said. I know, Piper said. That's kind of the point. Garrett stood beside Maren in front of his daughter's painting in the gymnasium in East Austin, on a school in East Austin, a Saturday morning in April, with the noise of the exhibition around them and the smell of tempera paint and industrial cleaner, and he felt the fullness of the moment the way you feel it when you're present in it, not thinking past it, not filing it for later, just in it, which was the thing he'd spent 5 years learning to do and was still, honestly, practicing every day. Maren's hand was beside his. Her fingers found his without either of them making a moment of it. He held her hand. He thought about Tesselit in the dark, the convoy boxed in on the road, 11 civilians, 10 seats, the decision that had taken approximately 4 seconds and had sent its ripple forward 8 years to a café on South Congress. He thought about the scar and what it had meant at the time, a detail, a consequence, the kind of thing that happens when you're moving fast in bad conditions and your body takes the cost of it. He hadn't thought about the scar in years. It was just part of him. He'd stopped seeing it in the mirror the way you stop seeing things that are always there. But Maren had seen it. 8 years later in a café from across a table. She'd been carrying that image, the scar, the calm voice, the red jacket visible against the chaos of the convoy across all the years between Tessellate and Café Linwood, through everything she'd built and the cost of building it. And it had been enough to stop her in a cafe and ask a question she already knew the answer to. People talk about chance as if it's random. Maybe it is. But sometimes what looks like chance is really just two people carrying the same thing in different directions until the distance runs out. He hadn't planned this. He hadn't planned Maren or the consulting work or open ground or Saturday mornings at Barton Springs or the red jacket in the painting. He hadn't planned any version of himself that included a second chance at something he hadn't known he was still holding space for. What he had done was stay. Stay in Austin, stay present for Piper's mornings, stay standing in the cafe when a man with a title and a blazer put his hand on him in front of his daughter. Stay honest about what he wanted, even when what he wanted was less impressive than what he could do. That was the whole of the strategy. You stay. You pay attention. You make the decision that costs you something now, so it doesn't cost the wrong person later. You do it without making a performance of it, because the performance is the part that doesn't last. The exhibition wound down around them. Parents drifted with children toward the door. Mrs. Okafor circulated with the patient goodwill of someone who loved this part of her job. Piper had found two of her classmates and was deep in a conversation that involved a significant amount of hand gesturing. Maren was looking at the painting. She's going to be something, Maren said quietly. She already is something, Garrett said. That's the whole lesson. She's already it, not what she's becoming. Maren looked at him. He looked at the painting, the deep layered color, the movement that defeated vocabulary, the evidence of a child who had restarted twice and hadn't let the restarting mean failure, just information. He thought that the most important things he knew he'd learned from watching his daughter work. The scar beneath his ear had healed years ago. You couldn't feel it anymore, only see it. It had started as the mark of a thing that had cost him something, and it had become because Maren had recognized it across 8 years, and a cafe, and the accumulated distance of two lives that hadn't known they were moving toward each other, the unlikely hinge on which everything that followed had turned. Not a wound, not a trophy. Just the shape the past leaves on you when it's trying to show you where you've been, so you can decide, clearly and with open eyes, where you're going. Piper came back to them at some point, slightly breathless, with a smear of someone else's paint on her wrist that hadn't been there before. "Can we go to the lake after this?" she asked. Garrett looked at Maren. Maren looked at him. "Yeah," he said. "We can go to the lake." Piper nodded with satisfaction, as if this confirmed something she'd already decided, and went back to her friends. Garrett and Maren stood side by side in front of the painting that was the best thing in the room. In the middle of the ordinary Saturday, that was the best kind of day, and neither of them said anything for a while. They didn't need to. Some things don't need to be said to be completely true.